All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. Thanks again for coming and joining us on this lovely Wednesday night. We're just gonna wait for a few more people to hop on. I'm assuming everyone can hear me, correct? With thumbs up? Okay, awesome, good stuff. Okay, great. Well, again, welcome back to those that joined us last week, and for those that are first timers for this week that weren't able to make last week's episode, welcome. We will be recording this, so we do ask if you could just put your first name. If you go to where you see your name in there, just right-click and rename yourself. We are going to ask you to put your first name and your preferred pronouns, just so when it's time for breakouts, we can easily identify who everyone is. That would be great. And we also do ask for everyone to have their video on. Please stay engaged. We have a lot of great content for this evening, so hang in there with us, and we hope that you all get a lot out of this. So as we're still letting people in, I'm actually going to pass it quickly over to Lucy. Lucy just has a word of mindfulness that she wants to share with everyone before we hop in.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. This is just a gentle reminder that as we continue to proceed diving into these difficult topics, what we are presenting is really a result of our creative takes on everything that is happening around these issues in this time. And we're drawing as much information as we can also from the Black Lives Matter community and other Black theoreticians. But I just want to make it really, really clear that all of this is, of course, open to your questioning and an interpretation. And this is what we hope that you bring to our dialogues in the breakout groups. Anything that is said that you question or wonder about or don't get or aren't sure about, please feel free to bring it up. Okay, thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Lucy. And just want to make sure that everyone has their microphones on mute, just so there's no kickback. Okay, awesome, thank you. And so we're just going to begin with episode 2, where we are focusing on white privilege, diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this is going to be led by Jordan and myself, so I will let Jordan kick us off.
All right, so for the agenda for tonight, we will be talking about white privilege and white fragility and how those two connect and relate. And then we'll be talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity in our environment, so education, healthcare, and the workplace. Then we'll get into our breakout groups, and then we'll come back together for a closing and large forum discussion. So we're going to get started with a poll. You'll see it on your screen. Do you believe that white privilege exists?
We're going to give it about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll.
Okay. So our results, 100% said yes and 0% said no. So that is good. I think this will make this less than a breeze for us. All right, so I'm going to close the poll. Okay, so white privilege, it is the automatic and taken for granted advantage that is bestowed upon white people as a result of living in society based on the premise that white is the human ideal, and it establishes white advantage as a matter of law and today as a matter of policy and practice. It doesn't matter if you agree with it, if you want it, if you don't want it. It is there 24/7, 365 days a year. And that quote actually comes from researcher and author Robin DiAngelo, which we'll kind of dive into her work a little bit more. So the image on the screen, some of the ones that kind of stood out to me in this example card, if I have low credibility as a leader, I can be sure that my race is not the problem. Another one, I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group, which is one that we're seeing a lot with our social climate, and we are starting to have more discussions about race. And you may find, if you're a person of color, that if if a white person initiates that conversation, sometimes you respond and you feel that they are under the impression that you're speaking for the race. And that's a lot of unwanted pressure, and privilege of a white person is that you don't have to encounter that. And then finally, another one that fits today's social climate: I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily and physical protection. And we spoke about this previously, but I know the talk for me and my parents, it was not necessarily just the sex talk. It was the talk about your physical and daily safety moving as a Black person in America. So we'll take it to the next slide. So some more examples of white privilege that you may see day to day that are kind of in your face. You see the Band-Aid at the top right-hand corner of that. And so products are made for you in mind. And so in that sort of situation, you don't have to go out of your way to find Band-Aids that match your skin tone. You are the dominant representation in all media. It's a norm to have the main characters be white. It adds flavor and spice if there's a person of color to the episode. So that's something to think about. And then some more examples is I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, and greeting cards, dolls, toys, and magazines featuring people of my race. That is another privilege that white people do have. So there can be a lot of controversy around the concept of white privilege. So I want to talk about what it does mean and what it does not mean to kind of diminish some of the defensiveness that comes with the term. White privilege does not mean that you've requested preferential treatment in any situation. It doesn't mean that your life was easy because you are white. It just means that your life hasn't been made harder. Your whiteness has not made your life harder. It does not mean that you are inherently racist, and it certainly does not mean that your accomplishments are unearned and that everything was handed to you just because you are white. However, acknowledgement and self-assessment of white privilege does mean that you can use it to expose racial injustice by ways of speaking up, standing with others, and inserting your privilege in the environment of other white people who might not understand the concept. So one example of that's a huge responsibility to take on. So one example, in a lot of the recent protests, you see that while white people understand that it's the voice of the Black people that need to be heard, they get to the front of the protest line. They are there kind of as a barrier to protect people of color from police brutality. So that's just one example of how white people have used their privilege to expose racial injustice and fight against it. Okay, so white fragility. This is another huge term that ties in closely with white privilege. So this is another term coined by Robin DiAngelo. And she really highlights two concepts: identity and individualism. So starting with white people and identity. When you think about race, when you think about background, when you think about diversity, you think about people of color specifically. You don't necessarily think about white people. And in fact, a lot of the research has found that white people are not necessarily in touch with their whiteness. If you were to ask a white person, describe 5 things about yourself, I am white may not be on the top 5 of the list. Whereas for me, growing up with Blackness being equated with otherness, I might realize that, I have a strong identification with my Blackness. So I might say I'm a Black woman. That might be at the top 5 of my list. So because white people necessarily aren't always feeling a strong connection to their whiteness and identifying with their race, it leaves white people feeling the sense of objectivity when conversations of race arise, because they feel like, oh, that doesn't really have anything to do with me, because I'm not a part of that. So race is perceived as a characteristic that is held by non-white people. And so kind of not embracing that leads to this objectiveness, and it also leads to not realizing that whiteness is actually a very powerful form of identity, and it shows itself and it presents and manifests itself in America in ways that are necessary for white people to combat. And so the second concept of white fragility is individualism. And individualism is held in very high regard in America, and not just with white people. This is the basis of the American dream as we know it. And it's the idea that you're your own person and you have full agency to get everything that you deserve and everything that you work for. It's this idea that like we can all kind of pull ourselves up from our bootstraps and make as much as we want of the world, and we can be our own person. And so once you combine that concept of identity with individualism, you get a message or a narrative of race doesn't really have anything to do with me, and the people that are white people that are racist, I'm my own individual, and so that kind of doesn't have anything to do with me either. So that puts you very far away from the fire that is racial injustice in the United States. And so when the fire comes closer to you, it naturally makes white people feel uncomfortable, and that's where those feelings of defensiveness come from. So we'll move to the next slide. So some of these examples that you see here, the first one, challenge to objectivity, is suggesting that a white person's viewpoint comes from a radicalized frame of reference. Or if we go down a little bit again, challenge to meritocracy, that's essentially what I mentioned with like individualism and the American dream, and you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So suggesting that group membership is significant. And if you can see how this all ties into identity, it's just distancing, easily having white people distance themselves from the conversation of race in America. And that is all.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Jordan. So I'm going to be diving into diversity and inclusion. And these are really big, hot terms right now. I'm sure a lot of people have heard them almost interchangeably, but it really is so important to understand the difference. And I found this amazing quote that really does make it so understandable. And when you understand something, it's so much easier to embrace. And so diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. So we're going to start off with diversity. So diversity includes and is not limited to race, color, your ethnicity, your veteran status, your language, age, gender expression, identity, sexual orientation. I mean, the list goes on. And what's beautiful about diversity is throughout the years it has broadened to be so much more because people are identifying with so much more, and there is so much diversity out there. So that's a beautiful thing. And what's so great about diversity is that with that diversity comes different perspective. And so now we're going to move on to inclusion. So inclusion refers to how people feel in an environment, if they feel wanted, belonged, and really feeling part of that community. So again, going back to our quote, you can be at your middle school dance, but if no one's asking you to dance, you don't really feel that belonging. You don't feel that value in being included. So you can have a diverse work environment or friend group, but you're not always included. And so that's why when people use diversity and inclusion so interchangeably, it's unfortunately not the best way to represent them, because they really do mean two totally different things. So just wanted to at least start off with that. And then moving on to our next slide, I do want to quickly talk about equality versus equity. I know that they are two words that sounded very similar, but this photo does a great job in identifying the difference. So in the photo to the left, you see three gentlemen that are standing on boxes. I'm sorry, I should say three individuals, because I can't see them, so I don't know, or I don't know their gender expression. So three individuals standing on boxes, and they were given all three the same height of boxes. Yeah, that's equal that we gave them all the exact same thing. However, do they all necessarily need it? Are we looking at them as individuals and figuring out what is specific to them that we need to give them in order to succeed? And so it shows you on the right side, equity. The individual in the blue shirt doesn't need a box because they actually have already the height to see over the fence, whereas our middle individual does need a little bit more help. And then our individual to the right definitely needs more help and more support. So it really shows that, yes, you can give everyone the same amount of tools, but some people might need more help than others. So equality is great, but until you have equity, it doesn't really hold that much water. And the way that I try to explain it is that if you give a kid, 5 people in a classroom their laptop and only 2 of them have Wi-Fi at home, how is that laptop that they're supposed to take home going to help and support them? So it's just kind of showing that we need to look at everyone individually. And so we'll go to the next slide. Oop. All right, now we're going to go in the deep end, everyone. So we are going to discuss diversity, inclusion, and equity, the challenges, the solutions, the benefits in 3 different environments. I'm going to start off by talking about education. Jordan's going to talk about healthcare, and then I'm going to talk about workplace. So again, a lot of content, a lot of facts, but I really ask you all to really hone in on these facts. Feel free to get a pen and paper down, write down these, and also we will be sending out these statistics after, just so you have them as well. All right, so education. So believe it or not, very believable, we have a bunch of challenges in our current education system. And 2 that really stick out are the lack of diversity in children's books. And this image here shows in 2018, there were more children books featuring animals and other non-human characters, which was 27%, than all types of visible minorities combined at 23%. So animals / others and white figures are consuming our children's books, and this causes a huge conflict for both the minority and the Black community, but also the white children as well. Let's start with the Black community and the minorities. Those children don't see themselves. They don't know where they stand or where they're represented. They are not reaffirmed that they belong in this story when they very much so do. On the other hand, this poses a problem for the white community. Those kids don't know what else is out there. When they go to other levels of education and they're in a diverse group, they don't know how to behave or know like the right social cues in order to engage. And so this really does pose as a pretty significant issue. And so it all starts from a very young age. So just having fair representation in children's books is a huge challenge that we're struggling with. Also, another one is lack of diversity in teachers. And so some statistics I want to throw out there is that 0.1% of Latino students attend a school system where the portion of Latino teachers equal or exceeds that percentage of Latino students. And it's only marginally better for Black students. It's about 7% enrolled in a district where the share of Black teachers matches or exceeds that for students. And among Asian students, it was about 4.5%. So very low. And the reason why this is an issue is because those that are, again, you're not seeing yourself being represented in an older figure. So again, it starts from childhood and also those older mentors that you look up to. And I'll head to the next slide. So here's one that I really do. I'm actually going to bring Lucy in a little bit to talk about this, but I was very shocked when, I guess I shouldn't say very shocked. I was shocked because I understood that there was discrimination in our school system, but I didn't realize how Black girls are actually being criminalized at alarming rates from school. So if you see, it says, Black girls do not misbehave more or commit more violations than their white counterparts, but they are referred to police and arrested at school at higher rates. And that's according to National Women's Law Center. So nearly 6 times more likely to get out of school suspension. And so, you know, my first question was, well, why? And some of the research that I found was that racial and gender biases obviously feed into this misconception that Black girls are more insubordinate and aggressive and less need of nurturing protection, which to me, it's just so incorrect. It's also showing that they are adultified at such a younger age. And so these statistics, I'll let you sit with that, but I'm have Lucy kind of chime in real quick on a good point.
I just wanted to make a connection to something that we're not going to address specifically in our series, but I didn't feel like we could move on from this issue of, Black middle school girls getting arrested at such a high rate without mentioning the school to prison pipeline. I'm sure that's a familiar concept to everybody who is taking this class. And the whole issue of mass incarceration and the carceral state is one of the hugest justice inequities in our country, and it really needs to be addressed, because what it really means is that after slavery, what happened in our country, it started in the South, but it is by now coast to coast. Slavery shifted into different institutions and different ways to oppress Black people. And you look at the statistics of Black people versus white people who are imprisoned in our country, and it's obscene. So I just wanted to mention that and let you know that there are a lot of resources in your participant resource page. And the particular one I would ask you to watch, if you have not seen it, is a documentary called 13th, about the 13th Amendment. And it will tell you all the history you didn't get in history class and how we got to the point where we are now. Okay, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate you focusing on that. Also, really quick, a great point to support Lucy's point. Research indicates that womanization and sexualization of Black girls happens at a younger age than white girls. So, yeah, again, these were startling. I mean, they should be startling for all of us, but thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And then I'm going to go into the next slide. So again, believe it or not, we're still on challenges in education. So we are going to talk about the LGBTQ plus community. So I know that you all can read these facts here, so I'm going to let you look at those. But I also do want to let you know there's a few other really striking facts that I do want to put out there. And there's quite a few, but just going off of the fact that's on the image here. So 59.5% of LGBTQ plus students felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation. And so that leads to, hostile school climates that are created, lower GPA for that community, and then less likely to go to college and just lower self-esteem. I mean, I couldn't imagine going to school not feeling safe, but this is a community that really does feel that they are misunderstood, and I do not blame them. And so a few facts I do want to share are as far as this community. I mean, there's much more of a higher suicide rate for this community. And again, I'll get to a few more of those facts a little bit later on, but just with these sitting here, 70.1% experience verbal harassment, and that doesn't even talk about the physical harassment that takes place. So just keep that in mind. Another challenge is the disabled. So a lot of students with disabilities are much more likely to be bullied than their non-disabled peers. And then in one study, it shows that 60% of students with disabilities on the autistic spectrum report being bullied regularly compared to the 25% of all students. So, I mean, that's just crazy because 25% of students are feeling bullied, and then having a student that doesn't obviously even choose to have this disability, it's very shocking. And what's even more shocking is that 1 in 4 adults have some sort of disability, including myself. I have ADHD, dyslexia, all those fun things that do make it very hard in your school community to find the right resources to help. So again, there's just a lot of areas in education that are being missed and need to be more focused on. So I do want to pull a question real quick. Let's see. We are going to ask this. Let me launch that real quick. And I'll give you all 30 seconds. All right, 15 more seconds. All right, I'm about to close and poll. Here are the results. Okay, so 4% feel very uncomfortable, 4% feel uncomfortable, 44% comfortable, and 48% very comfortable. So again, just knowing that anyone feels very uncomfortable or uncomfortable does show that there is still continuous work that does need to be done. So thank you all for sharing. And again, this is anonymous. And I'm going to move to the next slide. So some solutions to this, and again, I did a lot of research as to figuring out the best ones to really showcase, but a big one is having administration hire experienced consultants. So again, Red, White, and Black is a consulting platform that we are more than happy to go into any education system to host workshops like these. So please do keep us in mind. Not only that, but socioeconomic awareness and implicit bias awareness, just knowing how to almost unlearn that implicit bias, really knowing the right way to treat all students, and then also treating your colleagues at school. Some inclusive classroom climate and teaching strategies. One that I found was really interesting was there's actually a survey, a free survey that you can take to understand where your school climate is at when it comes to inclusion and diversity. So that's a great tool, which will be sent out to you all as resources as well. Knowing that words and pronouns matter. This was something that I learned definitely way beyond when I probably should have in life, but it is something that I think that words matter so much. It can really make someone feel a certain type of way, and we should recognize people and identify them in the ways that they want and feel. Another one is creating alliance groups, advocacy groups. I know a lot of schools are doing that because, again, that's something that's lacking. Kids don't feel supported and they don't feel that they have people that they can go to. Another one is creating a belonging statement. So in the classroom, I encourage those educators that are out there to make a strong statement that there is a zero tolerance for discrimination, or there's a zero tolerance for bullying, really making that known that this is something that you will not stand for, whether it's a joke or not. It's not going to fly. And also just incorporating ways to make kids feel that their culture is appreciated. Like the photo up here, having a child pinpoint where they're from, and maybe having like a potluck day where they're able to bring something in, or since we're in the day of virtual learning, have them, have their flag of where they're from, or things like that. Just simple things that can really go a long way. And another solution, again, I'll let you all read these, but one that I thought was really interesting on a college level is that there is a StoryCorps free app right here. So that is actually provided by NPR that bills itself as America's Oral History Project. So they have students conduct interviews with LGBTQ members in the community to broaden their understanding of the community, which I didn't even know existed, because to be honest, I don't know too many people from the LGBTQ community that would be willing to do that much emotional labor. So that is something that I think is a beautiful thing, and very understanding that people do want to learn more. And another one that I thought was great, this is one that actually hits very home with me, because I currently live in New York City, but the Brooklyn Independent Middle School, so they are a 6th to 8th grade middle school with a fierce belief that diversity and inclusion is the key to success for kids, and I could not agree more. So they recognize that there are community problems because Brooklyn, believe it or not, is one of the most segregated cities in their country, despite being, in our country, despite being one of the most diverse urban areas in the United States. Another problem is disproportionate seats. So there's so many elementary schools in Brooklyn, but not enough middle schools. And this poses as the middle school crisis. So in the US, there's a lot less focus on middle schools. And for many students who don't receive adequate primary education, it's too late to turn things around when they start high school. And so middle school really is that critical time to set up habits, mindsets of success. And believe it or not, a student's 8th grade GPA is the #1 indicator of a college admission. New news to me, had no idea. But this is fact-based, and again, we'll be sending these out to you as well. And then it says 8 out of 10 8th grade students lack the knowledge and skills necessary to enter and succeed in high school and beyond. And so their solution was to create this diverse middle school with not only diverse teachers, but students as well. And what's so great about that is that they use a unique sliding scale tuition model. So you'll see here for, like, this is very recent, 2020 to 2021 tuition ranges. So this model supports their commitment to making their education accessible to a wide variety of families with economic circumstances to provide equal access for all families across different income levels. So it's pretty spectacular, and it's doing so well and is so successful because parents are realizing that kids need to be put in these diverse pools to get the best quality of life, to understand that there's more outside of the world than their own. And then the benefits, you really can't go wrong. I mean, integrated schools help reduce racial achievement gaps. All students in diverse classrooms are better prepared for success in the global economy. It also improves cognitive skills and critical thinking, promotes creativity, which is great. And then also students with disabilities who are placed in general education classrooms get more instructional time and have fewer absences and actually have better post-secondary outcomes. And there's no negative impact on the academic achievement of the non-disabled students in the inclusion classroom. So that was a cool study to find. And then another specific benefit is that researchers have found significant positive results when Black and Hispanic students have teachers who match their race and identity, because it causes for better attendance. It also has more positive attitudes, higher test scores, graduation rates, etc. So you really can't go wrong with diversity in education. All right, so I'm gonna let Jordan take over healthcare.
Okay, so now we'll start diving into the challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare. So I'm going to start with a reflection by a medical doctor and now educator at Harvard University. And so she's detailing her experience and what she sees. So she says, a patient of mine recently shared a story with me about her visit to an area emergency room a few years ago. She had a painful medical condition. The emergency room staff not only did not treat her pain, but she recounted, they treated me like I was trying to play them, like I was just trying to get pain meds out of them. They didn't try to make any diagnosis or help me at all. They couldn't get rid of me fast enough. There was nothing in her history to suggest that she was pain medication seeking. She's a middle-aged church-going lady who never had issues with substance abuse. Eventually, she received a diagnosis and appropriate care, but it was somewhere else. She's convinced that she was treated poorly by that emergency room because she is Black. And she's probably right. It is well established that Blacks and other minority groups in the U.S. experience more illness, worse outcomes, and premature death compared with whites. So now we'll kind of lead into a video from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement that will detail a little bit more of these challenges.
Right here.
Is this racism? Is this racism in society and in healthcare, or is?
Racism is a significant contributor, I think, to it in multiple ways. Some ways in which the racism is obvious to individuals, and many ways in which the racism is not obvious to individuals. So let me give a couple examples. Back in around 2000, I was invited by the Institute of Medicine to serve on a committee that was going to address the question, what happens when Blacks and other minorities get into healthcare contexts in the United States? Does their race or ethnicity make a difference in terms of the medical care they received? The report by the IOM, released in 2003, it was called Unequal Treatment. And what it documented, it was across virtually every class of medical procedures, from the most simple to the most complex. Blacks and other minorities receive poorer quality care and less intensive care. We were not addressing issues of access. The question was, given access to care, is there a difference in the quality of care received? And we found absolutely there was a striking difference. We did not believe, the Institute of Medicine Committee did not believe, I do not now believe that the American physicians wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to get my minority patients today? I truly think that most medical doctors go to work and other healthcare providers and try to do their best for their patients. If that's true, then there's a conundrum here. How is it possible with people with good intentions seeking to do their best can nonetheless, at the aggregate level, create a pattern of care that is so discriminatory? Our answer was implicit bias. It's also called unconscious or unthinking discrimination. And when the IOM concluded that that was a contributor in 2003, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence. Today, the evidence is even stronger than it was then, that implicit bias exists among physicians and other healthcare providers, and that implicit bias affects the quality of care they provide to minority patients.
Can you help us understand a little better this implicit bias view? So I'm a doctor, a patient comes in, white, African American. What happens in my conscious or unconscious or in the interaction that becomes a generator of the kind of inequity you're talking about?
It's a great question. What the research shows.
All right, let me get back to where we were.
And this is about not white people, this is about human beings. Most of us think that we are driven by our conscious cognitive conditions. In fact, a lot of what we do occurs at a level beyond our conscious awareness, and is importantly driven by ideas and narratives and stereotypes that have been deeply embedded in us as part of the culture or the society in which we were raised. There's a lot of research that indicates that in American culture, African Americans, for example, are presented as lazy and dangerous and violent. Those are negative characteristics. Healthcare providers are part of the larger society. Research using the implicit association test, which is one test that tries to get at these unconscious implicit biases, finds that over 70% of all Americans have an anti-black bias. And the number for physicians is also over 70% because they are part of the larger society. We are products of the culture. So it does not reflect then the behavior of bad people. It reflects the behavior of normal Americans who are reflecting the biases and the messages about race that they have received. Importantly, what the research shows is that when we...
All right, I believe that's where we wanted to cut that clip. So Jordan, I'm going to let you take back over.
Yeah.
All right, next slide.
So I want to highlight, actually, before I dive into some of the startling statistics in the video, just to recap, I know that it was a lot of terms that he threw out, but he's saying that in this study released by the Institute of Medicine, they were able to account and measure and say, let's say we took away all of the healthcare disparities that we already know exist. So some of those disparities would be access to healthcare, health literacy, like do you actually understand what's going on with your health, or things like trust and like willing to trust medical professionals, as well as financial constraints. Those are all, or even location to a healthcare facility. I could go on and on and on about healthcare disparities and how they affect patient outcomes. However, this study is saying, let's say you took all of those things away. Let's say we all made the same amount of money. We all lived equally as close to a hospital, and there was nothing holding us back from receiving optimal healthcare. Even if we put us all on the same playing field, people of color would still receive poorer treatment and have worse outcomes than white people. So that does exactly highlight the effect of racism in healthcare. And so it's a 3-part interview, actually. We just showed a clip for the sake of the show, but it's something else that we'll send out to you guys. And if you want to watch it in its entirety, it is absolutely shocking. So keeping on with this insane shock factor, I'm just going to give you guys some statistics and that affects communities of color as well as the LGBTQ plus community. So research shows, and this is published by the CDC, the Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And so it is a public health and a human rights emergency because there's also substantial research that supports that most pregnancy-related deaths could be prevented. And that is another piece of data published by the CDC as well. So we're finding that, why is it that Black women are dying at an alarmingly higher rate? And it's basically because in our healthcare system and because of this implicit bias, like he said, I don't think doctors go to work and plan to be biased and treat their Black patients worse. However, Black women are undervalued. Their research shows that they're not monitored as carefully as white women. And when they do present with symptoms, they are often dismissed. And that quote comes from the American Heart Association. So it is shocking to, even if you look at the visual in the middle, for every 13 white women that die in the delivery room, 41 Black women are dying. And so I felt like we could not skip over that topic when we're talking about healthcare and racism and effects. And so the LGBTQ plus community is another community that suffers from discrimination in healthcare. So the visual that you see here, nearly 1 in 5 people in the LGBTQ plus community avoid seeking medical care due to fear of discrimination. So that's 20% of people in this community who their problems started before they even walked in the hospital. The barriers to them obtaining proper health care started before they even walked in the hospital. It's the fear of discrimination that's keeping them from seeking appropriate medical care. Then we find that a study that was published by the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force that 19% of transgender and non-gender conforming people have been outright refused care because they were transgender or non-gender conforming. So that's another statistic with huge shocking percentages. That same survey found that 50% explain that they choose not to disclose their sexuality to their healthcare providers for the fear of being discriminated against and not receiving optimal healthcare. Additionally, we're finding that another barrier to people of the LGBTQ plus community of seeking healthcare is because when they are talking about specific lifestyle things that impact their healthcare, or even specific transgender medical procedures like hormone therapy or gender affirmation surgery, they find that medical professionals just they don't know. So there's a huge knowledge gap. And so they go and they seek help. So you got 20% that doesn't want to walk in the door, 20% that when they get there, they are turned away. And then you have people who get there and finally are face to face with a doctor, and the doctor has no idea what they're talking about, because in all of the research and continuing education that doctors have to do, LGBTQ plus education is not necessarily in that required education. So I found another study actually that said in the United States, medical school education, a medical student will receive on average 5 hours of LGBT plus specific training. And that fact came from the Institute for Public Health. So we just are not putting the weight and the pressure of doctors educating themselves and it being required for them to have education to reach and serve this population. So we can go into some of the solutions. All right, so the first solution is one that a common thread through this entire series that you'll see, and it's personal assessment of your own implicit bias. And this will lead to improved patient-provider interaction. So the picture that you see on the right there is just a little cartoon of the implicit association test that we assigned to you all and sent to you guys as well. And so assessing your own implicit bias, educating yourself, and reflecting on that is one way to minimize some of the disparities of diversity in healthcare. And so improved patient assessment, and some of the suggestions to improve patient assessment would be to standardize it. And the thing is that healthcare, it does have to be individualized. Health assessment does have to be individualized and patient specific. But if you have a template, a standard way that when you meet a patient for the first time, you get a health and physical and you get their head to toe assessment, then it kind of, there's less room for your bias to come in when you are assessing that patient. You stick to what you know you should be asking everyone, you should be assessing for everyone. So back to assessing, ask about their preferred pronouns, do not assume sexual orientation or gender identification, and be inquisitive about patient lifestyles. And then finally, the research shows that retention and recruitment of diverse healthcare workers through ways of targeted efforts and promotion of diverse healthcare employees to leadership roles will in turn make us better providers for our patient, and we can provide more culturally competent and appropriate care to our patients. So, and I've actually seen that in my personal workplace. One of the jobs that I work at is at Sinai Hospital, and we have a very diverse staff. And I will share a very quick example. We had a patient who was furious, and he was of the Jewish religion. I don't know that much about the Jewish faith. And he was upset because his meal tray was not the way that it was supposed to be. And I just was like, I'll go get you something from the cafeteria. I could not understand for the life of me. Our charge nurse was Jewish, and he said, that he can't eat anything from the cafeteria. The only thing that he can eat is from this small cafe in the corner of the hospital, and this is kosher. And I was able to get this patient what he needed, feed him for the night, and it kept him from leaving the hospital because he was ready to go home because he didn't have anything to eat. So that's just an example of the value there. And the next slide. So just to reiterate, again, there's nothing that can go wrong with creating a better healthcare environment that is more diverse, inclusive, and equitable for all. But like I said, we will minimize the effects of health disparities, improve patient outcomes and their health literacy. And then also we will get diversification of research. So one example that actually Ms. Strasbaugh told me about, they need test subjects for the new COVID-19 vaccine. And to be honest, Black people are not volunteering. In general, when you look at the numbers of people who are willing to be a part of this study, it is not Black people. And that's because the research also shows that Black people are affected more than white people by COVID-19. So if we could balance the scales, even that out, then we could maybe have more diverse research participants, which benefits everyone. And then finally, if we make a better healthcare environment, then that's another way that we can recruit healthcare workers of color.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. And then we move on to our workplace. Again, I know we're throwing a lot at you, but I promise this is all things that we should be aware of and work towards changing. So hopping into our workplace, bunch of challenges here. I'm going to start off with our LGBTQ plus community. There are only 22 states with state laws that explicitly prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So again, that is just way too little. There needs to be much more that goes into this. And also it is statistics, 46% of LGBTQ plus individuals are closeted at work and 28% are totally closeted and not open to anyone in their life. And could you imagine going to work and not being your full self? I mean, that's just something that across the board, people should feel comfortable in their own skin at a place that they probably spend sometimes more time in than their own home. So that is a challenge there. Next, we go into a disruptive work culture with the Black community. So again, these facts here, I'll read a few. 45% of Black American workers say their workplace discourages discussion of racial justice and issues. And this is where a lot of these injustices take place. So that is something that really needs to be worked on in the workplace. Let's see, some other interesting facts of the lack of diversity and inclusion is only 4, and again, only 4 out of the 500 Fortune companies have Black CEOs, and all of them are men. So again, that's definitely pretty shocking. Out of 500 companies, only 4 CEOs are Black, and all of those CEOs are all men. Also, underrepresented minorities like Black and Latinx people still only make up single-digit percentages of the workforce. So major growth that needs to happen there. Also, disproportionate impact. Women and people of color have been disproportionately impacted by layoff during coronavirus, and partly because layoff decisions are typically based on tenure, and a lot of women and people of color tend to be more in those junior positions. So me being one of those that have been laid off, it doesn't feel great. I know there's some others else on here. I feel for you. We'll get through this. But again, this just kind of makes it feel a little bit more close to home, knowing these statistics. All right, so we're just gonna kind of hop into some workplace solutions. Again, consulting and permanent trainings to come into your office, like red, white, and black. We're more than happy to. We can chat after. If you're interested, please let us know. Also, recruiting strategies. For those in the HR talent acquisition world, typically you have the same places that you seek out talent and you kind of stick to that. However, it is encouraged to really look at those historically Black colleges and universities and look at those talent pool as well, because there is talent there. There's just the opportunity to be seen is the challenge. Also, recognition. Again, I know everyone likes to be recognized in different ways, but making sure that you feel valued at work. I mean, who doesn't want to feel valued and that they belong there? So really making sure that there's an inclusive culture there. Creating a safe space, making sure that you're checking in with your employees, because every employee is different and knowing what they need is very different from the other. And then also being held accountable. This is probably the most important step in creating change in the workplace, because we all know a lot of brands are being called out. For once, consumers are actually making brands accountable, and this is what's going to lead us to our next slide. I don't know if you all recognize, but this is Ben & Jerry's. We must dismantle white supremacy. Silence is not an option. And it really is just such a bold statement. They weren't afraid to, you know, be bold, be out there, be clear on their statement. So this was one that was really well constructed. And not only did they put this bold statement out there, but they showed who they were going to go donate to, other resources that their consumers can reach out to. And Lego did a great thing as well. They will donate $4 million to the organization dedicated to supporting Black children and educating all children about racial equality. And some companies are even putting Black Lives Matter at the end of their signature for additional resources for those that want to help be allies and resources there. And again, I thought this was just amazing. A lot of love here. McDonald's and Burger King's have a little kiss. I thought this was a great advertisement that really just show progression and where brands are trying to go and where the world should be. And then I'm actually, just for the sake of time, this is a question that will actually be asked during breakout. So we are going to skip this poll. But for those that don't feel that their employer are not being held accountable, there's actually a template out there by Whitney Evans that I will send to you all. If you feel like your employer is not hearing you, there's racial injustices, this is an amazing template that you can send to your employer. It's legitimate, it's well constructed, very concise. So that's something that is out there and available. So some workplace benefits. Again, you really can't go wrong. There is so many great benefits. I mean, again, me being furloughed, looking for a job, I am only applying to jobs where I feel that their values and ethics are firm in what I believe. And if they don't believe in racial equality, then I'm out. So that's where I stand. And it looks like 67% also joined me in wanting to join a diverse team. It looks like now 57% of employees want to prioritize diversity. And then also there's a ton of competitive advantages. 35% of diverse companies outperform homogeneous ones and 80% better at decision making. So again, there's really not much room for anyone to say that there shouldn't be a diverse or equal work environment. And again, all these resources will be sent out to you. I know we threw a lot at you, but just a quick reminder, if those who are not in the Facebook group or haven't joined yet, you do, for this series with this group, we do have a community discussion board where you can continue the conversation of this outside of this forum. And also we do have an Instagram account if you do not follow, Red, White, and Black series. So just take note of that. And then we are going to head on to our breakouts. So again, lots of great things here. And also, Matt, I do see you have a question. We will definitely get back to this. And that's actually a great question to bring to your small breakout as well. And we can even talk about it in the large forum as well. But again, just make sure you click join. Lance, do you mind launching the breakouts?